Good evening, all. Thank you for attending this monthly meeting of Lama and CERT. Tonight's topic is CERT emergency communications. We will be running through a beta test, a preview of the first module of the C8's 2020 CERT program. FEMA sent out an update called the FEMA 2019 CERT update. It actually came out in January of 2020. 2020, a year we'll all try to forget. And as bad as the year was, some of us think the FEMA slide set was just about as bad. There were certainly many problems in it. So C8, acting for not only the county of Contra Costa, but we have team members from Alameda County, and we've had input from San Mateo, and we have a team member from Gilroy CERT. So it's a broad-based coalition of people in our curriculum committee. So we're going through one module at a time, having one person being the key person for the topic, doing most of the modification, and then we go through it in committee and discuss everything that's going on. We go through every slide and we dissect it and we put it back together, and we come up hopefully with something that is good. We have a whole new format. The first thing you may notice is the look of the slides is different in that we have adopted a typeface that is called Atkinson Hyperlegible. It's from the Braille Institute. So the typeface is meant for people with low visual acuity. So it should be easier to read. I've tested every slide as I format it with black and white, which is the way you test for colorblind reading of slides. So we're going for the maximum visual ability. They may not be the fanciest slides. They may not be the most interesting visually, but hopefully they're pretty good, but they're easy to read, and people with color blindness of just about any kind can see the slides and get all the information. We've also updated some of the information that we've had in the past. As you probably all remember, we had a slide that was a constant slide, and we joked that we wanted you to memorize the slide by the time the series was over, because it was the first slide after the introduction in every module. Well, that slide is still there, but it is updated. We tore it apart and put it back together and put in some new things. And so it's a new slide, as you'll see in a moment. With me tonight is the principal author of this module, the comms module, Don Prosnitz. Don?
Yeah, hi, everybody. We're going to go through that. We're looking for feedback on it. As you know, communications is not part of the standard, although several cities taught it. It's not part of the standard FEMA deck. So we put this one together. A lot of what is in it was informed by the Light Up the Bay exercise that several of you participated in last year. So some of the lessons that we learned there, where we needed a little bit of help, we put into this slide deck, particularly about message passing messages and composing messages and those kinds of issues. But feel free to put something in the chat or, and let us know where we think we missed the boat or there's information you need that's not here, whatever. And although we're limited in, I think, oh, and it's also going to be, we set it up so there'll be 2 segments to it. The first part is sort of death by PowerPoint. We'll go through a whole bunch of PowerPoint to explain new stuff. And then the second part is the practical exercise, sort of split in half. And I don't know how much we'll get into the second one tonight, Duncan. Probably not much, I guess. I mean, we're not going to hand out radios or do anything like that.
No, not much. We won't have any actual practice, and there's nothing tonight about the operation of a given model of radio. This is the theoretical class, not the practical. It's how we communicate, why we communicate, not how we operate the individual model of radio.
But in the actual class, when we teach it, it'll be roughly half and half, 45 minutes and 45 minutes, give or take 15 minutes on either side of the theoretical part and the practical part. So the fact that you don't see it tonight doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. We're going to jump right in, and I'm going to share my screen. So as you can see, this is a beta for the CERT communications. What we're going to discuss is why communications are important, what information needs to be passed between responders, lost dogs, raging fires, the works. When should it be passed? Should it be passed immediately? Should it be passed leisurely? Should it be passed at when there's time, or that is a matter of precedence? Who needs the information, and when it might be a distraction, so we shouldn't pass some information. So here's the slide that we've updated. Personal safety is always number 1. That goes without saying, but we say it anyway because it definitely is number 1. The second bullet point here, and we have different bullets this time. We have little CERT helmets as bullets, but new formatting issue. Show up prepared. Always have appropriate clothing, footwear, have water, be ready for your assignment, whatever that assignment may be. Wear your PPE. And in COVID times, that mask, I moved it to the first of the list because that mask is more important than anything else right now. And also have at least one communication device, cell phone, a radio, at least one radio. And whatever you have spare batteries or power pack or some way to keep it going. We always work as a team. We size up to maintain situational awareness. In other modules in CERT, we talk about size up, and we're going to emphasize size up more this time or in upcoming sequences than we have in the past. But size up is just something that we always do no matter what the situation is. CERT goal is to do the greatest good for the greatest number. That we always have to remember and stress, and hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So we're going to talk about why communications are important, what information we communicate, and that's important because we have to figure out what do we want to talk about, what's needed and what's not needed, what's junk versus what's critical. When it's going to be communicated, that's the precedence of our communications. So we have to think about if communication channels get overloaded, what has to be said now versus what can we say an hour or a day from now? Who do we talk to? That's where everything goes and how it's handled at each step. And how do we communicate? That's the mechanics. That's using the radios, possibly using phones, but we're communicating mostly by radios. And how do we compose the message? How do we compose the message so that it is succinct, so that we know that we have the right information in it? So effective communications is a big problem in any event, in any disaster, because a lot of communications go down. In Hurricane Katrina, lots of the rescue efforts were hindered by failures of the local communication system. So most cell phones, landlines, internet connections were inoperable. We had lots of power failures, so communications couldn't go through. During 911, terrorist attacks, the problems with the emergency communications caused significant hindrances. I can't talk tonight, for first responders. Firefighters in the first building didn't know the second building had collapsed. Volunteer first responders entered the scene without radios and couldn't get information about what was going on. Cell phones were down. Conflicting instructions from 911 public safety workers in the buildings resulted in confusion among evacuees. And major communication hubs were located in the towers, so they were down. They were just gone. So that's critical information or critical problems.
I don't think I have ever heard I don't think I've ever heard an after-action report on a major incident where they haven't said communications were a problem. It's not just occasionally, it's always.
We're not a problem.
They've always been a problem, yeah.
They're always a problem. So CERT volunteers can be part of the solution.
Got to share the sound, Duncan.
I saw it there.
So highlight the green at the top. Okay.
Breached levees and flooding knocked out virtually the entire infrastructure: electrical power, roads, water supply and sewage, and communication systems. Thomas Stone, Fire Chief, St. Bernard Parish.
We lost our communication system, and when you're not able to communicate, you can't coordinate your response. You never ever think that you will lose your entire infrastructure.
Communications problems are not limited to systems being destroyed or not functioning. Similar problems arise when agencies cannot exchange needed information because of incompatible systems. NIMS identifies several important features of public safety communications and information systems. Communications systems need to be interoperable, able to communicate within and across agencies and jurisdictions, reliable, able to function in the context of any kind of emergency, scalable, suitable for use on a small or large scale as the needs of the incident dictate, portable, built on standardized radio technologies, protocols, and frequencies, resilient, able to perform despite damaged or lost infrastructure, redundant, able to use alternate communications methods when primary systems go out, secure, able to protect sensitive or classified information from those without a need to know. Regardless of the communications hardware being used, standardized procedures, protocols, and formats are necessary to gather, collate, synthesize, and disseminate incident information. And in a crisis, life and death decisions depend on the information we receive.
So it's greatest logistical problem in any emergency event, and we can be part of the solution. Communications promote safety because we can call for help when needed. Reporting safety-related incidents or concerns. We have casualty reports, we have damage assessments. These are all things that CERTs can report on, and we're the first ones on the scene. We're on the ground. So it's up to us to give this information to the system. We have search and rescue communications, status reports, so forth. Mutual aid requests, these all require effective communications. And the precedence of the information is essential, the message precedence. By precedence, we mean the priority that we give them. What is the most important? What can wait? So effective communications prioritizes the messages, and everything goes up to the CERT team leader, and they determine what to send to the people above them, the city EOC or the incident command center. If CERT is, as it probably will be in a major incident, CERT will be a small part of a major incident command. So the CERT team leader will report to the incident commander or the unified command center. And
So
then
when we ran the county drill, when we ran the All-Bay County drill, and we were relaying messages from 10 different cities up to the county, we had no precedence. We had no priority. The messages were going, and they were actually, you can't see me, but I'm making a pile. They were piling up in the communications room, and the county folks were not getting the really urgent ones for 20, 25 minutes because we were just going from the top of the stack down. And so there was a real problem that the important ones were getting delayed by ones that were less important. So that's one of the changes that we have to make, and we have to train ourselves in how to handle that.
So when determining the message precedence is essential. So the top precedence is called emergency, and it's to interrupt traffic. Some old ham operators call this break. The new term is emergency. This is the accepted FEMA and ARRL term now. The precedence is emergency. It's to interrupt traffic. So it's an immediate threat to life, property, or the environment, primarily life. Mass casualties, spreading fire, so forth. If there's on the next slide, we talk about a trapped victim. The trapped victim is a priority, but it's not an emergency until you get to that victim and find out that it's life-threatening for them. Then it becomes an emergency. So
you also see here you see a down power line. So that's certainly important to get back, but it's not an immediate threat to anybody right now. So that's why it's sort of a lesser threat. If there were children running around or something like that, you might make a different call.
So, and the precedents can change as the situation changes. As you get more information, you can change the precedents from routine, the next one, down. It may start out as routine, but then bump up to priority. And then if you find that there's a life-threatening situation, it can bump up to emergency. So these are the three: emergency, priority, and routine. And routine is, you send it whenever there's very little traffic, when the stacks, as Don was saying, when the stacks are low and you can just pass routine information. It's good to know information. It may be must know information, but it's nothing that needs to be responded to in a timely manner. Yeah, medical requirements need supplies. That may be timely, but it's not immediate.
So also each city will send out their own if you're lucky, the cities will send out their own guidance for how they want you to judge these things, or your CERT, who's ever sort of doing it will sort of give you some guidance.
So each organizational layer has its own responsibilities and capabilities. So here we have CERT administration or the team leaders. Then we have a big jump up here to local government. I would put between field response, ICP, and local government, I'd put in the incident command post, because frequently CERTs will not answer to the city EOC, but rather to an intermediate instant command post or a unified command where the law and fire and EMS and power and water and all of those people are all together, and we would probably respond to them, and then they would talk to the city EOC. So we may want to modify this diagram because, well, we're the top, we're the first ones to have the information, we're the eyes and the ears of the city. Then it flows down through our management, our neighborhoods, our divisions, whatever we call them. Then it will filter up through the instant command post for the incident itself, then to the city EOC, and then to the county operational area. From there, it might go to the state and then to the feds. So this progresses nicely in terms of importance, wherever it's at the level of importance. Who can take care of the problem is where it will stop generally. This is just a different view of that, going left to right.
Do you want me to go through this one, Duncan?
Sure.
Yeah. So you saw from the previous chart that the eyes and ears of everything is us. We're the CERT folks, and we see what's going on in the field, and we report that back to the next level, according to some sort of precedence. So at that level, the actionable information stops there if it can be supported either at the neighborhood or the incident command post. If you can deal with it there, you deal with it, and you don't have to pass the information on. The goal is you don't want to overburden the higher levels with a lot of information and stuff that they don't have to do anything about. So we sort of shrink the information as it goes forward. Situations requiring city notification and/or support, or situations requiring the county support, pass on to the next level. The CERT folks don't talk to the county directly. The county absolutely doesn't want that. That has to go through the city or the fire department, or however you're locally set up. In Walnut Creek, it's the city manager. In La Marinda, I think it's the fire departments. So once it gets to that level, there are situations that they can handle. They can either with Public Works, they might call 911 or whatever, and they stop there. They don't have to pass that on to the county. So again, we're shrinking what goes on to the county. Then there's stuff that the city may request. They may want status reports, how many damaged buildings. I know in La Marinda, you have your damage assessment forms. They may want that information and require it. But then there's also stuff that require county support. So for example, when you saw that hazardous material spill on a highway, that's got to go back up to the county. They have to know about that. So that stuff then gets passed up to the county, which technically is called an operational area. And they want emergency or priority situations that are beyond what the city can handle. And so that's a decision that's made by the city and/or who's ever managing it there. And that's major failures that have a significant impact beyond the city. The highways closed down. And then, of course, you also pass on if you need mutual aid. So the goal is to handle everything at the level at which it can be handled and not overburden higher levels who are actually getting information from multiple people with too much information or too many requests that they then have to say no to, or that they never should have seen in the first place.
Okay, so who makes the decision? In the field, individual CERT members know what is happening. They then have to determine the precedence. Is it emergency, priority, or routine? And all the messages go to the CERT incident command post or as designated by the local operation plan. In La Miranda, because we're more neighborhood operated than other areas, like Walnut Creek has divisions based on the school district boundary, the elementary school boundaries. We don't do that in La Miranda. So however the local area does it, the messages go up to the next level of the CERT command. And from there, at the CERT command, they figure out what can be done locally at their level. And then they also determine what messages have to go to the instant command post. This could be instant or a unified command post, or the EOC, or they can just deal with it in their CERT group. And from there, it goes up to the EOC, the city emergency manager or delegate. They're the ones that handle the information at that point. So we have a little exercise. We're not going to do this, but we just wanted to show it to you. So if you had a green, yellow, or red patient, how quickly does that information need to go somewhere? How quickly does that have to be transmitted, and where would it go? So if we had green, yellow, or red, does it interrupt traffic? Is that an emergency, or is it routine? This exercise is figuring out where it will go. And I would probably move the green and yellow patient should be one line and the red patient should be another line, I believe.
Yeah, so some of these things, so the point, again, this is a beta test. The point of something like this is really, and we can't do it on Zoom with 50 people, I don't think, is to engage in a discussion, because these aren't all obvious or certain answers. So for example, in Walnut Creek, the city goes back and forth as to whether they actually want to know an individual red patient, because they don't have the capability of doing anything about it anyway. While if you're reporting to a fire department, maybe they do. So what gets reported to who will in some sense depend on how you're organized. Landslide may or may not be important depending on where it is. So there's no definitive answer to a lot of these things, and it's the discussion that we're after when we go through this.
And the landslide by itself may not need to be reported
at all.
But if it traps victims or if it does other damage, then it could be.
Or if it blocks a key artery.
Right. So there are lots of if this, then this discussions. So you have to think about a lot of other things in here. Okay, and how? Don, you want to take this one?
Sure. So we've talked about, and I think, it's very theoretical, and I sort of apologize for it, but there's no point in getting on a radio or anything else and reporting messages that don't need to be reported or that get blocked behind. One quick anecdote, after 9/11, I was in Washington, and where I was sitting, I got the daily, what was called the Matrix, I think the Threat Matrix. There was a movie about that. It actually existed. And it turned out every single report from across the country that anybody thought was nasty got reported all the way up to the White House. And so when you saw this Threat Matrix every morning, there were hundreds of reports on it. Some vetted, some not. That doesn't do anybody any good. Those should have been vetted at lower levels. And that's sort of what we're trying to get all our CERT folks to think about. All right, so communicators like 1950. That's came from the Butte County Emergency Service Officer during the fires last year. And basically everything was out. There was nothing you could count on. The cell towers burned down. The cell phones wouldn't work. So counting on advanced apps and chat and all those other things is a mistake. And you need to go back to sort of the most stable and reliable thing you can do. If you look at the OES plan for the Bay Area, they explicitly state that we should not count on landlines or cellular telephones for at least the first day and maybe longer. And there's two reasons for that. A lot of the cell towers now are hardened against earthquakes, but they're going to be overwhelmed with traffic. And then they may run out of power eventually. And then, of course, as we've said, this loss of communications will impact the response. Okay, next one, Duncan. And the USGS has done their own assessment, and they say the same thing. The cell network is going to be down, overloaded, or damaged, and only 7% of the landlines. I don't know where they came up with that number, but that's their estimate. Will go through in the first few hours. And it's the first few hours that we all know are absolutely critical. And I know in some of the fires in Moraga and Lafayette last year, I think you had real trouble with communications on conventional communications anyway. So we all know it. And the question is, so we shouldn't count on the fancy technologies to save us because they're not likely to survive, at least early on. Okay. So there are multiple communications options we can use. The simple and most reliable, of course, is a person moving from one place to the other. It's reliable, it's flexible. You don't have to train anybody how to do it, but it's slow and it's only got, it can only go a couple hundred yards at most. There's a conventional that I was just talking about, landline, cell phone, and internet. It's familiar. We know how to use it. Potentially, you can get a lot of information to and fro. It turns out that if it's still up, you really don't want to send pictures. You don't want to get on the phone. You want to use text, SMS. That's requires the least amount of capability from the cell network. So just keep that in mind. If your cell network is still on, don't send pretty pictures of your house surviving or whatever it is, because that just takes up too much bandwidth and it's a real problem. But it does depend on wires or fiber optics and certainly electricity, and it's certainly likely to be overwhelmed. How long it'll be out, people are working on how to get that up fast, but it's certainly not going to be available for the first couple hours. So we, in all of our areas, are counting on two-way radios. They're battery operated. They don't require any infrastructure for the most part. There's three different flavors of two-way radios that we all talk about. There's the family radio systems, which are sort of low power, GMRS, which is used heavily by you folks in La Marinda, and then the ham radio, which you also use. And for example, in Walnut Creek, we're almost exclusively on ham. The ham is extremely reliable. GMRS probably is too. It doesn't require any infrastructure. You do operate repeaters, which is infrastructure, but if you lost the repeaters, you could still relay messages. And it does give you a long range with repeaters. They're complex, as you all know who've used them. And I will admit that I get confused by these things too. When I set mine up, the first thing I do is lock it once it's working, because if it goes somewhere else, I'm into the manual to figure out what went wrong, even with my own radios. So they can be complex, but if you practice with them and deal with it, okay. And they're of course not secure. Everybody can hear everything you're saying. So you don't want to pass on information that is sensitive, either names. You have to be a little bit careful about talking about minors and those kinds of issues. But as you know, in all our areas, we're concentrating on that. The range on these radios is variable. They all advertise up to 35 miles, and Duncan added this, and of course that's a joke. We all know that. It doesn't happen. 6 miles if nothing's in the way over water. Neighborhoods maybe 2 miles, but I know when I've heard stories, and I think you've experienced it again in La Marinda, you can't even talk to your neighbor, behind the fence sometimes. So you have to, that's why a lot of our areas, and I know Julie's been running that too. You're doing surveys of your neighborhoods to see what works and what doesn't. And you want to do that beforehand. Obviously, you don't want to wait for the emergency to find out it didn't work. Okay.
So simplex is the radio talks to another radio back and forth. It's a single hop to the other radio. It's line of sight. For most frequencies, it's line of sight. And we can enhance it by using what's called a manned relay. That's I can tell you and then you can tell someone else. But it's all these direct line of sight hops from radio to radio. Then we have what's called a repeater. In La Miranda, we have 4 repeaters, 3 of them permanently set up, 1 in each jurisdiction, Lafayette, Moraga, and Orinda. And then we have a portable repeater. The repeater listens on one channel and then rebroadcasts on a second frequency. And these frequencies are all programmed into the radios. So it will receive at one frequency, switch to a different frequency and rebroadcast it at a higher power. And because they're at high points and transmitting at higher power, they can reach more people. So you can actually put a repeater on top of a hill, and anyone who can see that repeater virtually see it, can get a radio signal to it, and then it will broadcast out to the broad range all the way around it. So repeaters are very powerful tools for us. Ham radios and some GMRS radios can operate with repeaters. FRS cannot. So anyone in the range can reply to a repeater, and repeaters can actually talk to other repeaters. You can link repeaters, like in La Miranda, we're looking now at linking all 3 repeaters so that if you talk to one, it's then immediately broadcast on all 3 of the permanent repeaters. So those are linked repeaters. So they have that capability.
So
Gives us a much broader range.
yeah, I don't know if you do this in La Miranda, but when you do, I know you run weekly nets. It's not a bad idea to practice the manned relay. If you should lose the repeaters, you want to be able to still communicate. So you might, practice as one of your nights is practice doing a relay, a manned relay, where somebody takes a message and repeats it on.
Julie, she's nodding her head.
Yeah.
She's got that note. Okay, so here's how repeaters and manned relays work. So you can see on the lower left, you have a manned repeater around those hills, where the left radio and the one below the hills can't see the repeater. They can't get the message directly, but they could get the message simplex, and they can repeat the message through the manned relay. The green lines are all talking to the repeater itself, an unmanned repeater. So we have the 3 radio services that we talked about, FRS, and very few radios now are pure FRS. Most of them, FRS is the family radio service. They are cheap, almost always sold in pairs. They don't require a license. The highest power they can transmit is with 2 watts, and they're meant for kids primarily, or
I
for
bought a set for my 5-year-old granddaughter.
And then GMRS, the General Mobile Radio Service, is what we normally use now. They use the FRS channels, plus they have additional capability. They have upgradable antennas, higher power. Instead of 2 watts on some channels, they can use 5 watts, and on some channels they can use 50 watts. So on the higher numbered channels, they can go 50 watts, channels 15 to 22. So they can communicate a long way. Most walkie-talkies now are GMRS, FRS combinations, and you find to use them on low power without a license. They're limited to 2 watts. On channels 8 to 14, they're limited to half a watt. If you get a license, and FCC just changed the license requirement to be a $35 fee for 10 years, but I understand if you go on the FCC website right now, it still says it's $70. So if you see $70, don't buy your license quite yet. Wait for the website to catch up with the regulation at $35 for 10 years. One license is good for the entire family, and that's considered a household. They are supposed to be living within your household to be a family license. I don't know that anyone would ever check, but it's a household license. Ham radio, on the other hand, has a lot more flexibility, and the power on the handhelds, they still are low power, but on the desktop versions of ham radios, they can go up to 1,500 watts with huge antenna arrays in your backyard. I mean, they can go almost insanely big and powerful, but they require a license, and you have to study for the license. Not hard to get a technician license. And again, it's $35 for 10 years. They've changed that. They've increased it recently, but it's an individual license. So everyone who takes the mic is supposed to have a license.
Well, if there's an operator with them, they're okay.
Right.
There has to be an operator nearby the radio.
Yeah, but if you have 2 radios, if you are separated and each has a radio, each has to have a license.
Correct.
Okay, so we saw this diagram before, and we're going to rework this diagram, but because it doesn't have the incident response or incident command center.
So we need to talk about that, because that's actually what the field response is, Duncan. That is
Okay.
that. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So
That's actually what that middle layer is. It's so at least in Walnut Creek, that where it says Division 1 command post, Division 2, that's a full command post with an incident commander and everything else.
right, but that's a CERT incident command post.
That's correct.
Not talking to the law enforcement, fire, the unified command post for a major incident.
So as far as I know, we don't have, the CERTs only report, at least, they only report either, well, in San Ramon, I think they report to the fire district. I don't know who you report to. In Walnut Creek, we do not, and absolutely, they won't even take our call if we report to the police, call the police department or anywhere else. It's a single, I'm just, for those who are listening in, I'm just describing how it is in Walnut Creek. It's different in different cities. But our CERT incident command posts are only, and our CERTs for that matter, are only permitted to talk either to each other or to the city EOC.
Okay, and that's different in La Miranda, because in La Miranda, the CERT management at this level, the CERT command post would talk to the incident command post, which includes law, fire, EMS, PG&E, so forth. And
Well-
then they would talk to the city EOC. It's just a difference in
It's a
jurisdiction.
difference in jurisdiction. We don't have that intermediate level.
Okay, so now we'll discuss how to apply everything, how to talk on the radio, how to compose a message, and how to use the radio. We're not going to finish by breaking into groups, but we would in a in-person class. So how to speak on a radio. Here we're talking about the ABCs. ABCs are critical in radio communication: accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Think about what you're going to say before getting on the air. Make sure that your message is true, that it's accurate, it's brief, and it's very clear. So accuracy, what are you going to say? You have to identify yourself using tactical call signs. No one cares that you are Joe. They care that you are at the SAR leader of this team, so forth. So use a tactical call sign. You describe what's happening, where it's happening, when it's happening, and when something needs to happen with it, when the action is required, and possibly how should the situation be handled. Write it down before you get on the air. You don't want to be trying to talk without having thought through everything you're going to say before you talk. So here, you're SAR 1, you're not Don, you're CERT control, not Tom. It's like calling to talk to the manager of a store. You don't care who the manager is, you just want to talk to the manager. People change, but positions don't. And the positions are normally assigned by the net control or the comms unit leader. It's someone who sets up the comms organization will set up the tactical call signs. And they don't change during your assignment. Don came up with this and I love it. Brevity, 25 words or less. Read the paragraph on the left and then the one on the right. I'm not going to read it for you, but so
If you listen on the radio, you will hear, if you listen, you will hear what's on the left, right? So you just have to think about it. That's why it's really important to write things down before you get on the radio. Another reason is, I don't know about you, I can talk to a lot of people. I can give presentations. I do that a lot. It may not seem that way, but I do. But I get on that radio even now and I can get tongue-tied. There's something about having that radio in front of me. I push the button and I stumble and everything else. So if that's you, it happens to all of us. But if it's written down before you do it, it makes it much, much easier.
I have these presentation slides all printed out with the instructor notes at the bottom. So because I get tongue-tied, I can just go in and read the instructor notes and know what to say. It makes a big difference to have it all written down. So clarity, how are you going to say it? Blah, 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 blah. Could you understand that? Of course not, because I was mumbling. Even if you're speaking very clearly, sometimes you can't communicate what you want to say. People don't understand the difference between CERT and BERT and some other term. So you frequently, you'll need to spell the word out using the phonetic alphabet. Charlie, Echo, Romeo, Tango. And no one who's a radio operator, who's familiar with radios, will not be able to understand those because they know those words. For figures, it's 198 hour, not 4, because 4 is for instance, but hour is how you pronounce 4 in numerals. So you say 198 hour instead of 1984, just because it's so much clearer, so easy to understand. So you speak slowly, clearly, and calmly. Break your messages into 5-word, small groups, 5 words or so, with a pause, because someone's going to write it down. And think, when you're talking, think about the person who's copying everything down, writing it. Give them a chance to write.
So, and the accuracy is more important than speed. There are instances where people have died because in the communication, they got the wrong address. They just didn't understand what was being communicated. It's really important to get that right.
So in clarity, also, what's acceptable? TIN codes, CB jargon are definitely not acceptable. And you want to use just simple, clear English or Spanish or whatever, but the tongue of the communicators with no codes in there. You do use what's called pro words. These are procedure words, and pro words are understood everywhere in the radio world. So over, go ahead, clear, out. There's some discussion about some of these where some people will say, instead of clear, you can say monitoring. But the American Radio Relay League, ARRL, has decided that these are the words that we should be using. That over, go ahead, clear, and out are the accepted words for emergency communications. And remember, emergency, as we said before in the President's area, was an immediate life threat or a threat to life, property, or the environment. And everyone must stop talking when someone calls out emergency. The old school is break, break. Break, break means the same thing as emergency, but emergency is the current recognized term.
So a lot of us grew up using the term break, break. And ARRL and a bunch of others have now said a preference for emergency because, number one, break, break is not an international term. People and the maritime folks, they all want to go to emergency now. Break, break is not understood internationally, and an emergency can't be misunderstood. So I think that's why they're using the trend. But as operators, you may very well hear break, break, and you need to know what that means.
It means stop talking.
It means stop.
Stop talking and listen to the emergency traffic before doing anything else. Okay. Privacy, we're talking about HIPAA. Everyone knows HIPAA, I hope. The Health Information Portability
And accountability.
Privacy.
Accountability, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, Act. Anyway, it's all your health information, what can be said and what can't be said, who can get it. So you can't pass some information over a radio, over an open communication channel. The PII, the personal identifiable information, including people's names, their birth dates, their social security numbers, all of that information you don't say on a radio. The identity to be reasonably inferred, as if you're talking about the former leader of a great nation who put his foot in his mouth and on Twitter regularly, well, everybody knows who you're talking about. You can't say that. You can't pass that information. So just be careful about how you refer to people. And individually identifiable health information, anything about a person's past, present, or future condition, or their mental health, you don't talk about it on the radio. That's just verboten. Okay, getting into forms. Here we have a classic general message form, a 213. This is one of the standard fire department and FEMA, they all use the ICS forms. 213 is general message. They're very nondescript, as they have no customization, but you can easily find customized versions of them. Here's a local example. This one happens to be Walnut Creek message form. If you're not in Walnut Creek, you're not going to see this form. You'll see some other forms. So this is just an example of what is out there. The whole idea is that they get all of the information written down on paper before it is communicated on the radio. And then there's a place for a reply so that you can put out the message, and then as the person on the other end is replying in their groups of 5 words or less so that you can write your message down, you are answering the reply, or you're writing down the reply. This form can then be sent to whoever requested the information.
So one of the reasons for using the 213 is good to use because it's standard. One of the reasons some of the cities, you have your own form, San Ramon has one, is because what you want to prevent is somebody writing down sending in a 213, this general message form, and in the heat of the moment, forgetting information. They forgot the address. They forgot, the time. They forgot one thing or another. And that leads to a lot of back and forth communication, which takes time. While if you have some sort of a form or even a template a checklist that you can go through before you fill out the 213 to make sure you have all the essential information on it before you get on the radio, because the back and forth takes up a lot of time. So you want to try and get it all right away.
Don, you want to talk about the plan?
Oh, sure. My favorite thing, a band plan. So this is, so we've talked about the radios and whether it's GMRS or ham radio, but it's got that silly dial on it that you turn to different frequencies and bands. And in the GMRS radio, I guess typically it's about 22 and plus the repeater channels. Hams, it's many, many more. And if 2 people are on different channels, they might as well not be talking at all. So it's a responsibility then of the communications lead to, in advance, put together a communication plan and say, this is the channels and the frequencies you are expected to use depending on what your function is in the response. And that'll generally I know in La Miranda and Walnut Creek, we pre-program some number of channels into the radio, so you know what it is, and they're numbered instead of frequencies. So the different functions might be general messages, which is generally called the resource net. In Walnut Creek, we have a separate channel for command and control, which is all the incident commanders can talk to themselves. Your SAR teams might want to report on a different channel so they don't get confused with what the medical or the EOC are going. So there's a whole bunch of different functions. If you don't have enough radio operators, then you only have one frequency and you have to control it somehow. But that band plan then lists what the function is and the channels that they're on, and that should be posted. And we'll see it should be prominently displayed before wherever your certs are getting together, or if they deploy from their homes or operate from their homes, they should know that in advance. Oh, and this is again a standard form. It's called a 205. This one happens to be what Martinez is using, and you can see they have then what the function is. It could be damage assessment. It could be a search and rescue team, the command and control, who is going to be on that channel, what the frequencies are, and what the channel numbers are. And this is an essential part of any communications plan. And you don't want to do it at the last minute. That should be done in advance. Okay.
So, in class, we would have a break time so that we could all stand up and stretch our legs. But at this point, let's just take any questions that you have. We'll have another question session at the end, but is there anything that anyone wants to say at this point?
Remember,
Duncan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Gordon. Just a couple of things, if I may. I think all of this is great, but Duncan, you've heard me say this many, many times. I think the instructors, we all have to look at who our audience is. And when you have a class of freshmen, and this is their first introduction to CERT, there is so much to absorb in the time allotted, which is, most of us think it's plenty of time, but our audience doesn't think like we do that are involved in this kind of stuff all the time, or at least have been. So I just would encourage everybody that's listening and those that make up the program, although I know we're kind of stuck, if you will, because FEMA puts it all together. And for those of you that have been to back east to a IEM class, emergency management class, it's a week of lots of detail. And these are professionals that go back there and absorb this material because they use it all the time. But our average class attendees do not. So that I just want to open with that. The complexity of operating the radio, and I know we do this, is there's some time for practice. But I think all of you probably who have taught a class or observed a class with regard to radios, many of the attendees are afraid of the radio. I mean, they're afraid to talk on it. They're afraid to push the button. And when you talk about repeaters, they don't know that, it's just very confusing. So I would hope that as we move on and further discussion is made by this group and others, that they take this into consideration. And on the last module or last subject, you were talking about the reports and radio assignments. That's something that I think the higher echelon, even the team leaders will get that information from dispatch as to what radio to use. For those of you who are familiar with an IAP on large incidences, and I don't know how that would work in a situation where you have a county-wide or a Bay Area-wide earthquake. We've seen what happens in the past, though we've gained 20, 30 years on that. But how an incident action report would go out. So with the radio assignments, it seems that would be the duty of the incident commanders, radio communication staff, and those staffing the radio. If there is no IAP to give the group the groups or the teams forewarning of what radio channels have been assigned for the following day, following 24-hour period. So those are, things that need to be addressed. I'm sure they will. But all I can say is we've got to remember who our audience is and not to confuse them with facts. So anyhow, I offer that bit of sage advice. At least I think it is. So have at it.
So this is Don. Thank you
Yeah.
for your comments. And as Duncan and the whole team knows, we have struggled a lot trying to find the right mix of getting the right information to folks so that they can communicate effectively without either scaring them, as you said, or without confusing them with too much information. So your point is well taken, and we'll have to keep thinking about it.
Okay.
I mean, if we talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
And what I think I have seen personally in the past is we spend a lot of time on the radios and how to turn them on and off and those things. But when they get on it, the messages that go out just obviate all the use of learning how to use the radio because they're not constructed well. So we're trying to split the class in half to do half on the message composition and the other half on what you were talking about on just getting them so they're not nervous when they hit the press to talk, which we're not talking about now. But what C8 has done is given us an hour and a half to do this, which is, I found staggering compared to what we've, at least in Walnut Creek, have done before. And then we all follow up with get on the air classes.
Yeah. Thanks, Don.
So anyway, I appreciate the comment, and it is something we struggle with.
Okay, unless there are further comments, we're going to continue.
How much more time do you have, Duncan? Because I may have to sign off.
Not much, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No,
Oh,
we're closing in on it.
Got it.
I think there are 45 slides and we're at 32. Okay, so Don, you want to talk on this?
Sure. So, so we're going to work a little more on this part, but this is sort of how to use the two-way radio. Turn it on. I mean, we can go through all this tonight. You turn it on, you adjust the volume, select your channel. Your team leader will tell you which to use. That's the band plan. It's critical that you test the radio before you leave. We have people, of course, I don't know whether you do, go out on their SAR team and the batteries are dead. So it's important that, you do this very quick testing before you leave. I discussed before locking the settings, particularly on some of these radios. If you lose the settings, we've had to send people out to the field to redo radios because just because what Gordon is, I think that's who it is. These radios are complicated and folks are not all that experienced sometimes.
That's correct.
And they lose the settings, and we've actually had to send people out to fix them. And I think we're just going to have to deal with that, frankly, because people are only picking up the radios occasionally.
Don?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Gordon again. When the students come in, they look at, and Duncan mentioned before, the FMRS radios, and there's so many different types and so on and so forth.
Right.
That drives you nuts trying to figure out which is
Right.
which. Though I think Duncan has done a great job in encouraging people to go to the FRMS or the GMRS, which is, while the radios may be complicated, the usage of them by the so-called, I guess, amateurs that are using them, it seems to work very well. Those that participate in the monthly nets. So it'd be maybe some way, if it can be done, is try to steer in the remake of this program, steer people more towards the GMRS radios. But I don't know if they'll do it. Many people only buy the cheaper ones.
So the issue is that, remember, it's a countywide presentation. And so, and we have to keep that in mind. In Walnut Creek, for example, we have almost everybody can run, has license and uses their ham radios. And we have standardized on 1 or 2 radios, and and once you lock them in and you program them, they're just like the GMRS. And we train them. But a lot of cities are going to GMRS, but we just have to cover everybody. I mean, because it's a county thing. So we were very careful not to recommend one radio or one service versus another. So, you know, and you even saw part of the problem when Duncan and I were discussing that one chart, right? He does, you do things one way in your city and we do something different in Walnut Creek, and we got to figure out how to make it so that this works for everybody. And so that's some of the problems we're having. All right, so back to using the two-way radio. Obviously be polite. Remember, everybody is listening in on it. Exchange questions and answers in brief. We've talked about this. Clear language, understandable, no 10 codes, no jargon. Certainly no slang, and certainly no ethnic slurs or gender slurs. And remember, you're talking to people you may not know. So again, you have to be quiet, and that you may not even have worked with in the past. And absolutely remember that the transmissions are not secure and may be heard by many people. And that's particularly actually important when you're doing exercises. We find that in many of our exercises, we forget to say this is an exercise. And all of a sudden, people on the radio think there's a real emergency going on. Okay, typical interchanges are you ask permission to talk, and you start by saying who you want to talk to, not who you are. And the reason for that is it gets the attention of who's listening. If you say your name, people don't listen. If you say somebody else's name, then they hear it right away. So if you're calling team 3, you start by saying team 3, this is team leader. And then you use the pro word over, which means I'm done talking at the moment, but I'm waiting for a response. And you don't say your name, you use your tactical call signs. And then you wait for a response. Team leader is going to say, or the team 3 is going to say, the team 3 is going to call back and say, team leader, I hear you. Go ahead. That's giving them the opportunity to respond, or they could just say over. Again, clear tone of voice and speak calmly, quietly, few inches from your mouth, and remember to pause before you speak. And there are very, very few words. Okay, here's again a sample exchange. I think in the interest of time, Duncan, should we go? You want me to go through this?
No.
We can do it. One of the things that we do, and I think most cities do it, although not all, we find it's important to report the message back, again, because accuracy is more important than speed.
Another thing noted here is the last line in red, Team A, WQJJ 957. That's the FCC call sign for a GMRS radio licensee. So you're required to transmit your call sign every 10 minutes at minimum. So,
yeah, or at the end of a conversation, essentially.
Right.
Okay.
So ham call signs are always required and are in the form of KX6ABC. They may be K6. 6 means California, but people can ask for a call sign other than a 6, or they can move into the state. So, but 6 is the region. K and W are the United States. Other countries have different prefixes. And the 6 or the X is just because they were running out of single letter call signs, and ABC is again just the call sign, the added suffix that makes it unique. GMRS call signs are required if you're transmitting at higher power over 2 watts. So they're not needed. While the FRS and GMRS channels are the same. If you're at the low power of FRS, you don't need a license. But if you're at the higher power of GMRS, you do need the license, which is just write a check, no test. And those licenses are in the form of WQJJ957. So it's four letters and 3 digits. And they have to be transmitted at the end of each communication block and at least every 10 minutes during communication. So we like to talk like the example of Lost Valley Team A leader KX6ABC. That covers all bases. So the net control operator, and we have several of those listening tonight, several people who've been net control operators for our local nets. They're the radio traffic cops. They keep everything moving orderly, in orderly fashion. They acknowledge when it's your turn to speak. They direct you when to stand by. So if you say you have traffic, they'll acknowledge that, and then when there's a break, they will call on you to bring your traffic through. They prioritize the calls based on the precedence, based on the nature of the message. And they may direct you, they may say, please go to a different channel or communicate in a different way if it's more appropriate. At this point in class, we would go into an exercise, would break into groups and talk back and forth.
Yeah, we will provide some guidance for how you might want to do this. But again, I think most of the cities will probably have their own preferred way of doing it, but we'll provide examples for those that don't.
Yeah. And part 1 asks for everyone to spell their name phonetically. Lots of people don't know the phonetic alphabet. We don't expect anyone to. So the next slide, we have the phonetic alphabet. So during the exercise, we'll display this. So when people get on the radio, they can look up and say, oh, well, this is Delta Uniform, November, Charlie, so forth. They can spell their name phonetically. As I was talking earlier about the figures, some of them, some numbers sound like other words, especially for instance, or power. When you're calling out a figure by phonetically, you would say figures, and then you would say 0 or 1, 2, 3, power, 5. This just makes it easier to differentiate these words from other words. And when you have a decimal point, you don't say point, you don't say 1.2.3, you say 1.2.3, because the point is hard to understand on the radio. Okay. Done?
Yeah, so what we thought we'd do is before the exercise, we'd model this on basically what a communications lead would tell his folks before they go out, assuming that they're not all that experienced or that they haven't done this in 3-6 months. We call it a just-in-time briefing before they leave, to just, before they get in the car or they walk or they leave their house, whatever it is, so that it's just the key things to remember, and hopefully muscle memory will take over. And that's what we would hope we would do before we divide it to groups. Safety first, the key points: listen before talking, push to talk with a slight pause or then release. Remember accuracy, brevity, and clarity. test your radios. And something that we don't often talk about is what are you going to do if you lose contact? And that's, of course, people will have to decide how they're going to do that. Is there an alternate channel? Do you move to where you could talk, or do you come home? So these are sort of key points you should tell your operators before they get in the car or they walk the neighborhood or whatever they're going to do. Because again, we're dealing with people who may not have been in the weekly nets, may not have used their radio in 6 months, and we have to give them the minimum that we can before they leave. And so the idea is to kick off the in-class exercise with something just like that, which hopefully will also bring back what they've just heard.
One comment about the safety first. Remember, when you're talking on the radio, it's just like distracted driving. You're distracted walking.
Yeah.
Don't talk on the radio and fall over a tree that's down. Don't trip because you're paying too much attention to your radio. Be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, we insist that our windshield survey teams have 2 people in the car, somebody to drive and somebody on the radio.
So remember, the general public and the media can hear what you're saying on the radios. So make sure that you don't say anything that you don't want to see printed. During calls, make sure to announce that it's an exercise at least every 10 minutes. It's just all stations, this is an exercise, this is only an exercise. At least every 10 minutes, just making sure that no one believes it's real. Then think about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And it's best if you can to write it down before you say it.
We had just let me emphasize this again, one more anecdote, and then I'll shut up. But during one of the urban shield drills, where we were running the communications, we heard over the radio that a man was down in one of the search areas. And the incident commander, who was a police chief, heard it through the radio. And he came over to, I was running comms at the time, and he said, what happened? And I called back and I was told, no, this is part of the exercise. Turns out it wasn't. So you can actually have the inverse problem too, if you're not very clear, where you actually do have a problem and they think it's part of the exercise. So you have to be nobody, it wasn't it was a trip and fall. Nobody was in serious hurt, but it was not part of the exercise. So it's really important to be clear and concise as to what's real and what's an exercise.
And in that case, you can say all stations, this is real. This is not
Right.
an exercise.
Right. And you can imagine I wasn't excited to have to go back and talk to the chief and say, I got it wrong.
So nets, there are regular radio nets in most areas. La Miranda has a net on the first Wednesday of every month. We post that in our monthly newsletter that generally comes out a day or two before that net. Has all the details on it. So participate to practice your radio skills. If you don't get on your radio and play with it and practice it at least once a month, you're going to get rusty. So it helps you meet people in your area who will be there following a disaster. You may not meet them face to face, but at least you'll be familiar with them because you'll have talked to them on a radio. And you can set up regularly scheduled nets in your neighborhood. Just get your neighbors, whether or not they are CERT trained, get them to get radios and push getting your network or your local neighborhood organized and get a net going. And it says, check your website for day and time. Well, in La Miranda, it's Wednesday evenings, and the time varies by city, 7, 7:10, 7:20, and then an overall at 7:30 on different channels and different radios. So we have nets for GMRS and nets for ham, so forth. But all the information comes out in the CERT newsletter.
Duncan,
Yes,
this is Todd, and I am net control tomorrow night for the Lamarine Area Radio Interest Group for those with radios that want to listen.
Wednesday.
It's not tomorrow night. That's only Monday. That's right. Wednesday night. I'm sorry. Wednesday night at 7:30. And we'll be on channels 124, or no, excuse me, 125, 126, and 127. Starts at 7:30. If you don't have a ham license, you'll not be able to participate, but you can listen and get a feeling for how nets are managed.
thank you, Todd. Now, for those who are out of the area, those channel numbers that he gave, those are numbers for LAREG's radio band plan. They have a code plug, they call it. It's the channel versus frequency. So those channels are the same on all radios that are programmed for LAREG's blue code plug.
So for the radio operators who are listening in, and I guess again, Gordon was talking about assignment of band plans and channels and who would do all that and across the county. I have assembled, as far as I can tell, all the radio assignments for all the CERT areas in the county that I can find. So I've got all the GMRS channels from all the cities, all the FR, and all the amateur radio channels and what frequencies they're using, because I was worried about interference and things like that. I can make that available for those who are interested in it. Fortunately, there's very little, as far as I can tell, at least on the ham bands, there's very little overlap between different areas that have sort of unilaterally decided which channels and which frequencies they're going to use. So, and this is apart from what ACES has decided, which everybody's following their channels for each city, but within the cities, a lot of people have made additional assignments, and I've accumulated all that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
Yes, Duncan, Jim Bonato calling.
Hello, Jim.
Hey, could you go back to, I think it's slide number 28 or 29?
Wow.
HIPAA 28.
29 then. No, it's the one with the where you're talking about identifying yourself every 10 minutes on the ham radio. There
Oh,
you go. Yeah, right.
there.
Okay, so I've got a question. I know that it's required by the FCC to identify yourself at the end of each communication block when you're using a ham radio, and at least every 10 minutes during a communication when you're using a ham radio. But is that a requirement also for GMRS?
Yes.
Okay.
May I add something?
Yes.
Sean Medina here, a guest from San Ramon Valley CERT.
Sean, you're not a guest. You helped put
Thank
the,
you
you
for
helped
inviting
us
me.
with this. You can't escape.
Okay, send blame my way indeed. On GMRS, the requirement is very similar. It is 15 minutes on GMRS. So this slide covers both cases
Right.
without adding complexity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other questions? Okay, then we have our takeaways, our final slide. So we want you to take away the radio ABCs, the accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Those are the the 3 things that you have to remember when talking on a radio. Think about the precedence of your message. How important is it really? And think about what you're going to say before you get on the air with it. But really think about precedence so you don't put a lot of fluff out there that doesn't need to be there. We want to get that stack that Don got at the EOC. We want it to be a minimal stack. Listen before talking. Whenever you turn on the radio, listen and make sure that you're not interrupting a conversation. Make sure that you know what's going on by listening, and then at an appropriate time, enter into the conversation, enter into the stream, and enter your message. Keep the messages short, 25 words or less. Yeah, well, maybe you can't say everything in 25 words, but that's a goal. So keep it short and sweet. And remember, they're not secure. Lots of people can hear them. Lots of people can misinterpret. So make sure that everything that you say follows the ABCs, accuracy, brevity, and clarity, and make sure that everyone will understand exactly what you're trying to convey, and that you don't say anything that you don't want on social media tomorrow or in 5 minutes. With that, I do believe we are done for the evening.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, everyone. And let me stop the sharing. Thank you all for attending. It was a good night. We had a lot of participation, and we are going to be going through additional slide decks as they get finished. So I don't know the sequence that they're going to be coming up, because it all depends on when the curriculum committee finishes with units, and I have the time to format them and get them in a final form so that they're ready for a beta review. So
Yeah, and if anybody, if you have comments after the fact that you didn't understand things, or there was stuff you wish you heard more of or less of, send them to Duncan.
thank
But
you,
no,
Don.
but I am serious. I mean,
Very
the
good.
reason we're doing this is we do want feedback. I mean, it's important to get this. We'll never get it perfectly, but it's important to get it as best as we can.
Yeah, and these are beta releases. They're not out for general consumption yet. You were all guinea pigs. This is all definitely beta release. So we're actively looking for comments, suggestions, and we will do the same with another module next month. Could well be utilities, hazardous materials, and fire, but then again, it may be another topic. So we'll let you know in the newsletter that'll come out around the 1st of the month. So thank you all for attending. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.